I don't know if this is a superhero movie, but it does have a giant swirling vortex in the sky during the climax.
Ba 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 da 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 ba 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 da 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 ba 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 da da da. And he's not afraid.
The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this movie, you might want to before listening to and watching this review. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Superhero Rewind Unscripted. Tonight, I'm going to talk about something that some people consider a superhero movie, some people don't. I was baffled the first time I heard someone call this a superhero movie, which was actually all the way back in the mid-2000s when I first saw it. A friend of mine brought this over to my place and made me watch it, and I thought it was really intriguing, and I enjoyed a lot of the social commentary in the movie, but to be honest with you, I was not totally sure what in the world was actually happening. And it's one of those movies where I got to the end, and it felt like the ending was explaining everything, and like everything adds up at the end. Oh, of course, rewind, spoiling everything. Oh, the airplane turbine from the beginning, aha! And then I sat through the credits, and then I went, wait a minute, that doesn't explain anything. I have no idea what just happened. And so yeah, this is a really odd one, and was a really popular, influential movie in the 2000s. I don't know, it's one of those movies that feels like it has a cult status, but was talked about enough in the 2000s, I didn't think of it as a cult movie. I thought of it as just a sci-fi movie, superhero thing, if you want to think of it that way, that a lot of that seemed to influence a lot of people's careers, and that a lot of fans respected real highly, and it watched like kind of kind of an elitist kind of movie, like if you, like a hipster thing. If you understood this movie, then you were in the in crowd, and you thought deeply, and you had stuff figured out, and you were kind of a simpleton if you didn't. And I must have been something of a simpleton, because there were a lot of things, like I said, that I found super intriguing and interesting about this movie, but I could not figure out what the actual story was about. It's yet another cryptic, ethereal movie that's kind of more about the ideas and how it makes you feel than it is a concrete, coherent story with a clear internal logic. It's a little bit like the movie that I reviewed last week on Rewind, on Requested Rewind, The Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie, except this one has kind of a built-in explanation for everything. It's got an easy cop-out. Well, everything that happens is God's plan, or is the universe's plan, or whatever, and so it's difficult to question anything without potentially the movie or proponent of this movie saying, well, you see, everything that happens had to happen. It's almost like Palpatine's behind it all, except in a way more sophisticated kind of way. It's all, at the end of the day, a conceit. What really matters is our protagonist is given a choice at the end to save the universe at the expense of his own life, and he takes it. He starts as something of a fatalist. He is described as an agnostic, who doesn't necessarily believe in God, but also doesn't rule out the possibility, and that leads him to eventually kind of question whether anything really matters. It's not nihilism, but it's fatalism, in that, okay, if we're all being marched in a particular direction by God, moved around like pieces on a chessboard, then whatever we do doesn't really matter, because we were gonna have to do that anyway. There's no way around it. So how are we any different from animals at that point? Even though we feel self-aware, we feel more sentient, are we really? Does that really matter? And then when his friends and family are put in jeopardy, it kind of changes the whole ballgame, and he does what he was kind of destined to do all along, which kind of begs the question, did he ever really have a choice in the first place, even though at the end it really seems like he does. So it's a really thought-provoking movie, certainly, but it's another one of those kind of brain teasers that makes my brain explode, and I don't know why I had to do two of these in a row. It was kind of the next thing that sort of fell a little bit anyway into the superhero category, enough that I felt like I could get away with using that title in the episode, but I question highly whether this should count. And I'm going to go through kind of the pros and cons, or the reasons for or against that idea here after a little while. But as always, thanks so much for watching live if you're doing that, and thanks for clicking on this after the fact if you did that instead. I've got a lot of notes here because this is another one of those brain-bending movies that made me write lots and lots of questions, and I also have a lot of really interesting thematic ideas to kind of mull over and go through. If you... Quick plug for Patreon, you can leave a tweet-length review for future movies on Rewind at the $5 tier, patreon.com/geekvolution. You can become a Superhero Rewind producer at the $10 tier, and that lets you kind of help me put some things together for the show. You have a little bit more input in the whole process, and starting next month again, after we get away from request month, you'll be able to start voting in polls to help me choose episodes. Also, this coming week on Saturday, with the Patreon producers, I'm going to be watching The Batman. We're going to do a live watch party and kind of discussion together on that. So again, $10 tier if you have any interest in joining the Discord for that over there. And also, once again, they're not on sale right now, but we still have the Superhero Rewind t-shirts. And we've got the Unscripted shirt and then just the regular SR shirt. I actually just bought a couple myself recently, so you might see one of those on the next show. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get into this. And of course, if you want to make sure that I talk about any particular aspect, I'm going to be real thorough here, but if you want your opinion known, or there's an aspect of this that I'm not getting to yet that you want to hear about, you can leave a super chat in a dollar amount or just leave a regular comment. But I'm going to do quite a bit of analysis before I start interacting with the group. So anyway, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. We got Adam March, Hayden Spring, Guidi's here. Welcome, guys. How's it going? Okay, so like I said, real cryptic movie. A lot of question as to whether a lot of things would this really make any sense, and I'll break all of that down. But it is important to note that this is one of those cases where there's a theatrical cut and a director's cut. And pretty much all of the mythology and the pseudoscience is in the director's cut. I think even with that cut, there's kind of some extra reading that maybe you need to do, and I didn't do all of it because I don't believe in this idea of a movie requiring supplemental material in order to understand and appreciate it. I want to take what's here on its own terms. There's maybe an argument to be made in any media for this kind of thing. I would appreciate it more, I guess, if the movie came right out and said, okay, we just can't get everything in this movie. Here's the required reading, and that's a super insanely risky thing to do, especially if you're going to put a movie in the theater and expect a person to do that. But I had this thought today where I was like, well, I always kind of condemned this notion and really resist it. And then I'm thinking, okay, but am I against, like, concept albums that have, like, a comic or a book or something that you have to read to go along with it? And then I'm thinking, well, a lot of those you can kind of appreciate as music, and you don't have to necessarily know what the story is to have some kind of an experience with it. And then I'm thinking, well, this is presenting itself as a pure narrative. And so I still kind of resist it. But I'm wondering if there's not some space for it somewhere if you made the case properly in the piece. But I do think it's important to do that, and this isn't exactly doing that. The director's cut does it better because there is a text in the story of the film that's, not to get too far ahead of myself, that's a book about time travel, about the philosophy of time travel. I don't know that it really makes sense to call it philosophy. It's kind of just the rules of how time travel work when it is particularly pertaining to the creation of a secondary universe. And I kind of question whether that always happens when you time travel in this universe. But again, getting ahead of myself, none of the text, none of it is in the theatrical version, and everything that's actually happening literally with the metaphysical concepts and the alternate universe that has been created that our protagonist is certainly in is not clear from the movie. You would never ever be able to pick up on it. And so the kind of college kids, the deep thinkers that said, like, if you don't get this movie, you don't think deeply enough, I understood it, probably read somewhere online, even back then, or in a magazine or newspaper or something, somewhere, the director explaining some of the concepts, because that's the only way that you would get that Donnie Darko has found himself in a tangent universe, and that the turbine that crashes into his room at the beginning of the movie is the artifact, capital A, that needs to be returned to that universe so that the universe at large, capital U, isn't destroyed. Watching just the theatrical version, and I hadn't seen it since probably 05 or 06, so it had been, a decade and a half. So watching this again, just the theatrical version, not reading up at all on any of that, because I never understood the alternate dimension business with this movie. I had no idea that was even a thing. I had to do a weird amount of research to even figure that out and realize that the director's cut was kind of necessary to watch. I knew that there was one, but I couldn't find it. It wasn't available anywhere, and to watch online, it was very expensive to order the disc, and at the point that I was looking into that, I didn't really have time to necessarily get it here, because I couldn't just, Amazon Prime it. It's kind of rare, and it was difficult to get, or at least from what I looked into, I wasn't able to find one, cheaply enough, and to get here on time. So I lucked out, and somebody had uploaded it on YouTube, and it hasn't been taken down yet. It's not a very good quality copy. It's a little fuzzy, but at least I was able to see it and get the dialogue and know what scenes are missing in the theatrical version. It runs a little long, and it's difficult to get all of the information from the text that you need from the book, but because it just takes pictures, literally, I think, of the actual excerpts of the book that the director and writer, Richard Kelly, wrote for this thing, that I guess he put online at the time, and fans were reading that and then kind of getting the movie, or pretending like somehow I think that probably happened. People kind of pretending like, oh yeah, no, I got this myself for the movie because I'm a genius. No, you would have had to read that stuff, and it's not on screen long enough, and it's real, I want to say heady, but it's just a lot of terminology. It would be like if a Jonathan Hickman book was adapted wholesale, like a Jonathan Hickman book, like his X-Men or his Fantastic Four or something, where there's a page of just exposition about the pseudoscience and the mythology, and you've got to commit that to memory because it's going to matter right now. And that's how that director's cut watches. It is the way to watch it, because again, it doesn't make any sense without it, and it still doesn't entirely make sense, I don't think. But also, it has a number of kind of connective tissue scenes that the theatrical version is missing, and some kind of nice, heartfelt or moving scenes with some of the character interactions, particularly with Donnie and his family, and his girlfriend, too, and Gretchen, that I was kind of stunned not to see in the original version. There are behind-the-scenes kind of sad reasons for that, which I'll get into with some background information here in a little bit. This is one of those movies that was kind of mind-blowing at the time, and maybe doesn't hold up as great now, just because of, like, it does watch kind of dated, and I think it has to. There's not really any way around it. That's not a slight against the movie. Some of it is that, like, trying to emulate a Stanley Kubrick movie, that sort of thing. I kind of brought this up last week again with Man Who Fell from Earth, where it feels like one of those, or it feels like something like Eraserhead or something. And that's not to say that we're not making those now, but you can see some of those direct influences from somebody that would have grown up when those movies were newer. But also, this is before the J.J. Abrams mystery box, and it's not as novel of an idea when you've had numerous movies, and I don't mean just Abrams, but all of the guys that jumped into that kind of storytelling, the mystery that is maybe never going to fully come together, but it's fun just to try to understand it, try to put it together, or maybe you're just duped every time, where you just keep expecting that when you get to the end of the thing, it is going to culminate into a cohesive whole and everything's going to track and come together. After Lost, after really everything that J.J. Abrams made, it's not as much of a novelty, but it is still a really artistic piece. It's a real technically impressive piece, and it's weird that a movie like this can make me feel as much as it did and make me appreciate its main character, and maybe really latch on to especially social commentary when the actual story itself, some of it is kind of nonsense, and where even character choices are made just because that's what has to happen to progress the narrative. And that's the thing that makes me appreciate it maybe a little bit more than something like Man Who Fell to Earth, where that is actually, in some ways, that movie is not as irritating, just because it's a little clearer that that it's just not going to fill in all of the blanks. But with this, it feels more pretentious than that in a way, where it's like, oh no, it all makes sense. That movie's like, it doesn't matter if it does. And this is kind of, maybe, especially in the director's cut, beating over the head with, well, I know what it means. The director, it makes sense to me. I understand it. Why don't you understand it? Well, because a lot of the choices that your characters are making are just because they're being pushed through the narrative by God, or some fans have theorized aliens, or just the universe at large. It's kind of problematic when a lot of people who love your movie think they understand what it means, but they all think different things about it. And yet, like I say, I think I like it in some ways more than that movie, just because it takes me until the end before I realize that it's not all coming together, and I feel like I'm tracking it. I feel like I'm getting it before that, and I enjoy that experience on a first watch more than something like Man Who Fell to Earth, where I'm clueless from like 5 or 10 minutes in. Not that I feel like I'm getting all of the pieces of the mystery with this, but I'm buying more what the main character is doing, and I'm appreciating his plight more, and it's not all confusing. There's at least character stuff I can latch on to first time around. I had the same thing with that movie too, though. Both of these required a lot of writing of notes on my part before I could appreciate a lot of the things that I ultimately did end up appreciating. But I think on just one watch, even the theatrical version is a more entertaining film. And I'm only comparing them because I just did both of them back to back, and I had somewhat similar experiences with each, and I'm a crazy person for trying them both back to back. And wait till you find out what I'm doing next time, because I'm really a crazy person there, although it's not going to be another cryptic, ethereal kind of thing. But it's also going to be a movie where not everything is going to make sense. I am teasing you on purpose with that. Okay, let's get into some background here. We've got a lot of early performances for actors who would become huge A-listers. Jake Gyllenhaal and Maggie Gyllenhaal, both here and playing brother sister. The youngest I've probably ever seen Maggie Gyllenhaal, and I'm convinced that she gets cast in things because of this giant infectious smile that she has, that's like really sarcastic and is kind of amusing when she's laughing at other people's plight. And also, there's a very young Seth Rogen in this movie who is a bully who kind of gets people killed at the end. And we get veterans, even though this is such a tiny movie that was only made for like $5.5 million. We get performances from veterans like Patrick Swayze and Drew Barrymore. And Barrymore is in this movie. I really like her in this. She's in this because her production company made the film, Flower Films, which is still in production today and still making kind of big movies. I'm not sure why Patrick Swayze decided to do this, but he is kind of perfect for the slimy character he's playing, the self-help guru, and this movie nails the whole BS self-help guru nonsense. It's great. So like I said, real small budget. This is a 1988 period piece that's made in 2001. On a first viewing, I sometimes had to remind myself that we were supposed to be in the late 80s, and then as more of the story unfolds, it more and more feels like a story that could only be told then, particularly with how it's dealing with bullying. Even in 2001, I feel like we'd handle that maybe a little bit differently. Maybe there's a little bit with technology and stuff, but also I think this director, I keep having to look him up again, Richard Kelly. I think this is Kelly maybe looking back on his own childhood and lamenting his own education and the way he was raised. Maybe not with his parents. I don't know anything about the man, but he's got a lot to say about the problems with the public education system, the way children seem to maybe be brainwashed to some degree, and the way that adults would oversimplify the very complex identity issues and just difficulty navigating the waters of adolescence and being a teenager. And that's the stuff that most, I'll get into thematic stuff here in a little bit, but that's what most resonated with me in the movie, and it all reads really authentic, and I was right there with it about all of that, and I felt like I experienced some of that as well when I was in high school, which would have been, a decade after this period, a little bit more than a decade. I graduated in 2003. This takes place in 88, so yeah, I start high school in, I guess, 99. So you could argue that that stuff just got worse, or that it morphed and changed. There's a lot of stuff here about paranoia with teenagers having sex and doing drugs and alcohol and all of that. The DARE movement was big when I was in elementary school, was already kind of going away and phasing out a little bit by the time I was in high school. You know why? Because it didn't work. A lot of those programs kind of had kids just trying things that it was trying to get them not to try. Anyway, it's also a Halloween movie. It takes place at Halloween. It's also a real spooky thing. That's why I went with the kind of moodier, darker lighting setup this evening. It's a psychological thriller, and it is a horror movie that really subverts a lot of the expectations of horror, because you spend a lot of the movie wondering if your protagonist is going to be the horror villain of the piece or not. He's said to have a mental condition. He's said to maybe be schizophrenic. He's talking to an imaginary character through a lot of the movie until you realize that it's not so imaginary. And at the point that you realize that what's happening is not because of a mental condition, and it's actually much more out there and much more insane than that, it kind of stops being... It remains moody, it remains creepy in a lot of places, but it stops being as much of a horror film, and it starts being a lot more of a science fiction movie. And a lot of the horror, you realize, is more of a real-world horror, and starts to come more from the way adults are treating children, and the way children are treating each other, I suppose, as well, than it is from the supernatural threat. This was released less than 2 months after 9/11, so naturally it wasn't given a lot of publicity because the airplane crash setup hurt it at the box office, and the studio just wasn't going to release a lot of trailers about that kind of a situation in a movie. It was ultimately a success in making its money, in more than making its money back on re-releases. It was put back in the theater, I think, several times, and it was also difficult to get distribution initially because the main character fires a gun, and this was at another kid who is, of course, Frank, the bunny rabbit, who initially in the film you think is a hallucination, and then turns out to be a character from the future, question mark? A ghost, question mark? I have no idea what Frank is. But anyway, this was 2 years after Columbine, so two big kind of cultural strikes against it there because of what was going on historically right then. Kind of unfortunate and a shame that happened to this movie, but also understandable that people were very sensitive to those topics at the time. It almost also didn't get licensing for its songs. I think these guys were really gutsy in making this movie. They were showing it to potential distributors with all the music already in the movie before they even had the rights to use most of or all of it. You've got a lot of popular songs here, or I guess 3 or 4. There's Tears for Fears. There's also a Tears for Fears cover. Kind of interesting that it opens with a Tears for Fears song, which is eerily, by the way, narrating what's happening or what's going to happen in the movie. It's very striking, and we'll get into the lyrics a little bit later, but it's hard to believe that the movie wasn't entirely written around that song. If the script was put together, or the ideas were put together, and then they went and found that song, we're like, holy crap, look how much it all lines up. That's amazing. I have no idea. The Tears for Fears cover is Mad World by Gary Jules, which is one of my favorite covers of all time. A song that I really appreciated when I was in high school. I liked some kind of emo rock type stuff back then. I don't know if you'd put it in that category, but I think it's kind of in there, and it puts an absolute perfect cap on this movie. It's hard to imagine it without it. That song was also used in a Smallville episode in, I think, the 2nd season, which is where I first heard it, because I didn't see this movie until, like I said, 05, 06, when it had already been out for a few years. But by the way, when I saw it, I think the director's cut must have already been out, because I read that it was released 3 years after the original release. So this comes out in 2001. We've been doing a lot of stuff from particularly this year and lately on the channel. So 21st anniversary of Donnie Darko. He's old enough to drink now, folks. And it's so that would have had to come out in 04, 05. And so right around when I first saw it. And I don't think my friend knew about it. But anyway, moving right along. So we've got a super chat from Philip Kelton. Thank you very much. Frank is the god of the machine. Well, yes, narratively and thematically, I get that, but literally, physically, I don't know what he is. But again, if your explanation is, well, it's all God doing his machinations, then yes, fine. Like, that's the explanation for everything in this movie. The big question I have at the end of the day is, why does it have to be so convoluted? Why is God's plan so all over the place? But I guess he works in mysterious ways, right? Or it's aliens. So this was distributed by Newmarket Films, which almost made it direct to video. I'm mentioning a lot of history with this just because it's fascinating that it came together the way it did, and this easily could have been the kind of movie that was dropped, had maybe a little bit of a cult following, but hardly anybody ever saw and ever knew anything about. It was partly distributed because of, or one of the reasons that it ended up coming out the way it did was because of Christopher Nolan and his wife, believe it or not, who saw this movie and maybe at a festival, I'm not sure, but arranged a screening for the executives, and that's why Newmarket picked it up. So if it weren't for Christopher Nolan, right around when he's making Memento and 4 years before Batman Begins comes out, you wouldn't have Donnie Darko, and likely, or you wouldn't have it the way you have it. They had to take half an hour out in order to get anybody to distribute it, which is why you have the very rough theatrical cut that is missing way too much. I think it is more compromised as a piece than the Daredevil director's cut. I think it's more compromised than the Watchmen theatrical cut, and yet it is the reason that the movie was so popular. This is not one of those situations where it comes out and nobody can get their minds around it and they move on, and then eventually people try it again with the director's cut. It's not like fixing a video game with patches or DLC or something. People loved it despite not understanding it, which is a testament to the execution of the piece, of the cinematography, of the acting, of the editing, and it was just a really unusual, new, unique thing. And even if you didn't get what you were looking at, and this is why I ultimately like the movie, even if you don't get what you're looking at, it's hard not to be moved or affected by it in some way. This is one of those, and I always hate using this phrase, it's one of those something for everyone kinds of pieces where, I agree with, because I've read Roger Ebert's review on this as well, I agree with him when he saw the theatrical cut and said it doesn't really all culminate into anything. It doesn't really come together at the end. And yet, it's hard not to deny the artistry of it. It did have a sequel called S. Darko, which had nothing to do with Kelly at all. He didn't make that movie, and he is, again, I mentioned this last week, it seems like every time I decide to review something, that's around the time that a sequel or a remake ends up happening for it. He's working on a sequel to this right now that I'm sure will have nothing at all to do with that other sequel, which I've heard terrible things about and have never seen, but that's supposed to come out in a year or two, so I will take a look at that when it happens. Like I said, the director's cut is absolutely crucial to understanding what's going on. If you want to see it and you have only seen the theatrical version, like I said, you can watch it on YouTube right now anyway. I didn't put a link in the description. I might try to do that after I'm finished here, but just know it's not a very good transfer, but it's watchable enough to get what's happening with it. So apparently, like I said, most of the movie is taking place in an unstable tangent universe that is tethered to the primary universe via a wormhole. I need a description of the rules of all of the time travel and the creating alternate universe shenanigans before I have any idea what's going on in this movie. And we'll go over some of that as we go. I'm going to go ahead and lay out a synopsis with this one too, in case it's been a while since you've seen this, or in case I have no idea what we're talking about. So, and my synopsis could be mistaken in a place or two, because this is me trying to explain what I think is happening. Philip Kelton put in another super chat. There is no God. D universe made one to save itself. Donnie universe, is he saying because it's a D? I mean Donnie universe made one to save itself. Well, I think kind of the point of the movie is that there's no telling what the grander design of the universe is, but that there must be one because people are manipulated to do what they do in this movie, and because everybody is moving toward a preordained path. Although, it is also possible that, I suppose, that there, at least with this movie in this universe, that there, in fact, is no actual design. Because one of the things I really appreciate about I think it's suggesting there probably is, but I like the discussion in this movie because it's the thing I thought a lot about, and this really resonated with me, about the difference between, I'm getting ahead of myself because I have notes about this, but I'll mention it now, the difference between predestination and foreknowledge, precognition, and the ways in which they might be one and the same. So, if there is a God, let's just put it in those terms for a second, does God make everything happen the way it happens, where you go on a path because it's God's master plan? That phrase comes up a couple times in this movie. Or is God simply omnipotent, but gives you the ability to choose, gives you free will? And so he knows everything that's going to happen, which could be tantamount to the same thing. There's a whole discussion about this in the movie. The idea that if God knows what's going to happen, is it not the same thing basically as if he made it all happen, where you have free will in the sense that there are actions and consequences. This breaks down in the movie because there are places where people make choices seemingly for no other reason than the next thing has to happen. That's where it kind of breaks down. But if there's only one track of the universe where if you went forward in time over and over and over again, no matter what you changed in the present, people would still make the same choices because it's already been laid out, that because like it's already happened, because time is not exactly linear, then it would suggest that whether God means to or not, he's created one path, and there's no possible way to deviate from it. And the only person that could change things if he chose to is God, but he doesn't because he's given us free will. But again, maybe it doesn't matter that we have free will if we're going to do whatever we did anyway, if that makes any sense. And that's why in the scene with the science teacher, and I really like this part, and it sucks and it bothers me, where the scientist shuts down, the science teacher shuts down the conversation because now we're talking about the creation of the universe, and he might lose his job. This is 1988. I like that a lot, but and again, it bothers me and it's unfortunate, but it speaks the truth, so I really appreciate it. But Donnie has that line, and this is the thing that makes the science teacher stop talking to him about it, where he says, but if you're in your own path, then maybe you would have a choice if you knew what the future was. So like, well, I know that I'm going to get hit by a car tomorrow, so I'm going to not go to the parking lot where I was going to get hit by that car. But he says if you're in God's path, then you wouldn't be able to choose. And I think that was all very interesting. Anyway, so let me go ahead and break down my synopsis very quickly. Donnie Darko is a troubled teen taking medication for mental illness, or ostensibly. It turns out that they're sugar pills, and he doesn't know it. I don't know if his parents do either. That's never talked about. He sleepwalks and sometimes does terrible things he can't control. Although I will say that at one point his mother says she knows that he doesn't have a mental problem, so maybe she does know that. I don't know. It's subtle. An airplane turbine lands on his house in his room, but he isn't there because a voice in his head that manifests as a six foot tall creepy bunny rabbit tells him to go outside. The rabbit says the end of the world is coming, and throughout the movie, he also tells him to flood his high school and burn down a self-help guru's house, which he does. He starts dating a girl with a tragic backstory about a stepfather who also has mental illness and stabbed her mother, which is why she lives in Donnie's town now. Donnie resists his teacher's brainwashing, an education that tells him life as a teenager should be magically easier than it is, and that gets him into trouble. He discovers a book called The Philosophy of Time Travel and realizes he might be the chosen one in a convoluted master plan that God or the universe or whatever has to stop the end of the world, and that he is actually in a tangent universe, and the turbine is a sign of that. He sees the preordained plans of everyone around him manifested as swirling tunnels of liquid that point them in the direction of their fate. Special effects that look very much like they belong on the CW in 2001. He comes to question whether humans have any more choice or self-awareness than animals, but finds a reason to save the world when the lives of Gretchen, his girlfriend, and his mother are on the line. By the end, he realizes he can sacrifice his own life in the past to make sure the artifact as described in the time travel book, in this case, the jet turbine, it always has to be something metallic, I think, crashes in the primary universe where it belongs, closing the time loop of the tangent universe. One big question I have is if this is a causality loop that keeps happening over and over again until Donnie finally makes the choice to sacrifice himself. But then, because it kind of plays that way, but then if it is a causality loop, the problem with that idea is that the vortex at the end is supposedly threatening the whole of the universe, not just the tangent universe. I think the idea is if the jet turbine doesn't go where it's supposed to, reality is destroyed, not just the tangent universe. I'm not 100% sure about that, but if that's the idea, then they can't be in a loop. I don't think. Donnie is dead, and after he sacrifices himself, and so now in this new timeline, he never dated Gretchen, but she seems to have some recollection of him as she waves to his mother at the end. And the reason that we know for sure that several people, but not necessarily everybody, in the original universe knows about things from the tangent universes because the book tells us. The last chapter that we get information on is called Dreams, and they have dreams about what happened to them in the tangent universe. And I guess the idea is supposed to be that their consciousnesses either duplicate or get transferred over to the tangent universe, and then when it's destroyed, they wake back up. I would be fascinated to know if anybody is listening right now or after I've broadcasted that doesn't know about, that likes this movie. I say broadcasted. I don't even know if that's the correct past tense verb. Since I've done my broadcast, I'd love to know if there's anybody that really likes this movie that is not aware of the time travel mythology and has never heard any of this terminology. Okay, so it's time to break down the big question. And the reason that we're doing this on the Superhero Rewind program is this a superhero movie? So I'm going to give you some evidence for and some evidence against, and you decide for yourself. I will say, spoiler alert, I'll jump ahead for a second and say, I think I'm at the moment in the camp of not really, but I don't mind if you decide that it is. We've talked about this 1,000 times on Rewind. Superhero is a really vague term. And I'm coming to a place where I don't think for myself there are any, like, there's a list of just like 3 or 4 things that you must have if you're a superhero, if you are a superhero, or if your movie is a superhero movie, right? I don't think you necessarily have to have a costume. I don't think you necessarily have to have powers, but I think there have to be enough things that add up to put it in the genre. I don't think you can have just 1 or 2, but I don't think anything has to have the same 3 or 4 things. Philip Kelton, he has another super chat and says, here is my explanation above. He says, Donnie created God like Frank. Frank teaches Donnie how his power and trick him into creating him and caring for the rest of the world. Donnie goes back in time, makes a different choice, and cuts paths with collapsing wormhole by making a different choice and breaking the connection to the collapsing timeline. I think a lot of different interpretations might be valid with this movie. I don't want to get into an argument with you, Philip, about like my explanation or like my read on the movie versus yours, like throughout this whole thing, because I have a lot of notes to get through. But I will just say with that idea, because you're not alone on that. There are a lot of people in some reading that I did today that think that the whole thing is either in Donnie's head, or that, yeah, he kind of creates the universe. That doesn't especially track, I don't think, with the text of the time travel book, unless he creates the rules of it himself. But like the idea that he is the creator of the universe, or of God, like, I guess I haven't thought about this. I guess I could kind of see a read where this universe is in his image, maybe. But as far as the idea of like creating God itself, I don't know about that. Because, and I'm not totally sure about the first thing either. Because the problem is that you have the woman that wrote the time travel book, who there's a lot of evidence that she herself has been in his position before, that she's essentially been the one. Now, I don't know why she didn't have to sacrifice herself like he does in order to save the universe, but the idea, it seems to me, is that she has done this herself once before, and that she has some kind of cosmic awareness because of that, and has seen something of the future, and knows that at some point he's going to give her a letter. I have lots and lots of questions about all of that, and I'll get to them in a little bit, but yeah, I'm not totally sure if that whole thing tracks. But anyway, let me get into the superhero movie question. Okay, so evidence for. Well, we have a protagonist that has powers. That's first thing. A lot of superheroes have powers. It's in the name, superhero. He has an alliterative name, and that's the one thing that's talked about in the movie related to superheroes. I think a lot of people probably picked up on that line and decided he was a superhero based on that and based on the fact that he uses powers to make an epic sacrifice at the end of the movie. But it's the only discussion of superheroes in the movie, and people probably also latched on to his line at the end of that exchange because it's Gretchen who brings it up. She's like, Donnie Darko, that sounds like some kind of superhero or something, and his response is, how do you know I'm not? And some people might think that that's the movie telegraphing that idea, and a lot of foreshadowing in this movie, a lot of setup and payoff. You could make the case that that's going far enough to say he'll be a hero by the end of the movie. But does that mean that we should consider him a superhero movie? A superhero? Let's discuss more evidence. Well, he's got a tragic backstory. He's got a mental condition that gets him into trouble and arguably maybe leads to something of his worldview and his personal morality. He does have a moral imperative, and he acts on it despite obstacles, and including the law. Although when he does that in especially the places where the rabbit is giving him, is telling him what to do, it does not seem like he's doing that of his own accord, because he's sleepwalking and he either doesn't know he's doing it, or, like he says to the therapist, like, thinks that he has to do what he's told because the rabbit saved his life, because he would have, gotten crushed by the turbine if he hadn't gone outside. By the way, before I understood the tangent universe idea, my head is going to explode. Before I understood that whole idea, I could not get my mind around why the rabbit would even bother to get him out of bed, because it's him being there that somehow saves the universe. So I was like, at first I was like, well, why doesn't he just leave him in bed and then you're good? Like, he has to sacrifice himself. Well, he sacrificed himself. What, does he need to do it of his own accord or something? Like, why does it matter? And then I watched the director's cut and finally understood that we were in another universe, and I was like, oh, it's about the artifact. And he's in the primary universe now when he does that. I really like the minimalism of this movie. I like how grand scope it is, while taking place in a small town in just a couple of settings and all of that. But at the same time, it makes it difficult for the movie to describe exactly what's happening, because you don't have the big spectacle of visual storytelling to show you, okay, we're in this universe, and now we're in this other universe, because, you know, they look exactly the same, and it's very Twilight Zone in that way. Noah O just put in a $5 super chat. Thanks so much. It's a shame Richard Kelly only made one good movie, but fortunately this one holds up. Yeah, and I'm not sure what else he's made. I didn't look into that. It'll be interesting to see if a couple of decades later he can, or almost a couple of decades later. No, I say it is a couple of decades. What am I talking about? It's 21 years. It's old enough to drink. If he's able to make a decent sequel to this. Let me continue. Yeah, moral imperative. The protagonist is ultimately selfless, makes the ultimate sacrifice. He saves not just his own friends, but the world. Very often superheroes are saving more than, something grander than just people they know, although you can arguably be a superhero and not have, save a city or a whole world or anything. He has a love interest that he wants to save the world in order to protect. There is a costume involved, but the protagonist isn't wearing it. But he does spend a lot of the movie thinking the rabbit is a part of his own psyche speaking to him. But at the time, he thinks he might be schizophrenic, and the rabbit is making him vandalize and destroy buildings. So he does not see himself as a superhero. He's not the one that wears that suit. Something else this reminded me a little bit of is Unbreakable, as soon as I was thinking again about the idea of it being a superhero movie, just because if it is, it's very subtly a superhero movie, and it goes to horror places as much or more as that, or thriller places, I should say, and there's a little bit of Shyamalan-ness in this movie. This is only a year after Unbreakable as well, so I don't know how much of an influence that director might have been on Kelly, but The Sixth Sense is early enough that, at least in the way it's shot, it certainly could be. I think he was shopping this around quite a bit earlier than it actually got made. The crimes that he commits are against the villains of the piece, if you can call them that. The people who run the school are awful. They don't have the kids' best interest at heart, so he floods it. Cunningham turns out to be running a child porn ring, so Donnie sets his house on fire. But, again, he's just doing what he's told. He doesn't know why he's doing these things, and it's not subconscious because it comes from a ghost or whatever Frank is. Keep in mind that Frank is shot in the eye and killed, and even if he's not killed, the world has to end after that, so I don't know. I'm not sure how he's traveling back in time if he's not some kind of ethereal entity. I read a lot of suggestions that he would have to be a ghost. He kind of plays as a Ghost of Christmas Future sort of character, but he knows about time travel, and he talks about, well, I guess he doesn't really lay out how the vessel works, the idea of building a time machine. He just knows the future and is back in time, and only our protagonist can see him. So, yeah, I don't know. Oh, and there's a big vortex in the sky at the end. That's a big superhero movie thing. And then I had this thought. If Chronicle is a superhero movie, this might be too. Nobody really disputes Chronicle as a superhero movie, even though it's another thing with a character that doesn't have a costume, does have powers, doesn't have a superhero name, has a singular act of heroism at the end, and who knows if he ever does any heroic acts after that. And yet, my gut says Chronicle is very clearly in the superhero camp, and partly just because it's obviously influenced by and looking at that kind of material, and this is not necessarily doing that. Okay, so here's some evidence against it. Our protagonist doesn't know he has powers or use them until the very end, although in the I think I wrote that note before I saw all of the director's cut. There, if he knows that he's the one, he would think that he has powers even if he hasn't used them yet, because that character is spelled out to have reality-breaking powers. He does have a sixth sense at this point, though, because he is already seeing the like liquid lines coming out of people. So that in and of itself is kind of a superpower. He is disturbed and thinks he has a mental condition and never decides to act as a superhero. He does the sacrifice thing at the end, but that doesn't inherently make him a superhero. You have a lot of heroes in movies that we wouldn't call superheroes, and you have a lot of people who don't make the right choice until the very end of a movie, not necessarily a superhero. He doesn't fight crime. There's no supervillain. There's no antagonist to the superhero except for bullies and stuff. He commits acts of vandalism and shoots a man in the eye before he does anything heroic. He is not the one who wears the costume, as I said. Frank is. There are other characters in fiction who have superpowers who are not considered superheroes. He seems more like a character out of a Stephen King novel. Stephen King is evoked in this movie with the mom reading it at the beginning. Would you call Firestarter a superhero? Although I guess the new terrible Firestarter movie tries to frame it as a superhero movie, and you could do that as a superhero thing, but I wouldn't call Firestarter a superhero book, really. So it's dicey. And then I'll bring up another movie to compare it to, where I said if Chronicle is a superhero movie, maybe this should be. But if The Matrix is not a superhero movie, then maybe this shouldn't be. People don't consider The Matrix a superhero movie, and Neo arguably is more like a superhero than this guy is. But there is certainly a hero's journey thing happening here that I don't think we can deny. Okay, so I think at the end of all of that, I'm still coming down on, I don't really think of this as a superhero movie, but I get how people got there, and I especially get it more after the director's cut. Okay, let's lay out some themes. This movie, just like the one we did last week, is about all kinds of stuff. Some of it all comes together and correlates, and some of it seems like just things that, like social commentary that Kelly wants to deal with because his main character is a teenager who is having a coming-of-age story. And the end of his coming-of-age story is, unfortunately, death, but it still is kind of that. Okay, so mental illness versus perceived mental illness. We have a character who all of the things that initially we think are done because he might be schizophrenic are because it's a side effect of being the chosen one in the Tangent universe. It's the reason that Sparrow, the 101-year-old woman who apparently has been through this herself, is, even though she didn't have to sacrifice herself, has kind of lost her mind. And I suspect that the same thing would probably happen to him if he somehow was able to survive all of this. But then there is the question of whether he was actually mentally ill in the first place, because he burned down a house. It was abandoned. I think that's the movie saying, like, well, he didn't actually kill anyone until the very end of the movie, ever. But he accidentally burned down a unoccupied house when he was younger because he was sleepwalking, which suggests that he did used to have a mental illness. But everything that he does with what seems to be a mental illness here in the Tangent universe is explained away by the fact that he's hallucinating, because that happens to you if you become the chosen one. And so that's a huge question I have, and I've got a list of questions. I'll probably skip some of them because I'm already hitting some of them when we get there at the end. But again, he's being given placebos. His mother says, I know there's nothing wrong with you. How long has that been going on? Is the idea that he was never mentally ill? I'm not sure. And then in the director's cut, there's this interesting line from his father where he says, I don't think you're crazy. And he says, I used to be crazy. The father, about himself. I used to be crazy. I'm not anymore. So what's that about? Is it like it runs in the family, but at some point you get over it? These are all questions I do not have answers to. Free will versus predestination, naturally, is like the main all-encompassing theme of the movie. Predestination and the time travel paradox are perhaps one and the same. There is a whole discussion of fear in the movie and the way adults oversimplify and blame the idea of fear for everything, which I really resonated with me. So the question of whether or not fear is a bad thing. Donnie sees fear as a natural part of the human experience and something you overcome naturally as you better yourself. Cunningham frames it as the root of all evil and the source of weakness. Generally, if you're afraid, you don't believe in yourself and you make mistakes. He makes other people believe in that just to sell books and his seminars. Fear is not the opposite of love. You have that scene, this might be my favorite scene in the movie, where the obnoxious, kind of politically correct teacher puts up on the board, based on Cunningham's teachings, fear on one side, love on the other side. Every decision a person makes must fall on one camp or the other, and the way Donnie dresses her down on that is spectacular. Arguably, I would say fear might even be related to love. And then at the end, Donnie has to face his fear to save the universe, and his big fear is being alone. And he's afraid to die alone. He finally faces that fear, not just generically overcomes it, like, I'm not afraid anymore, I can deal with anything. No, he faces it head on, because that's what you have to do in life to solve your problems, and that's how he solves the problem at the end. Then you have the theme of, there's a lot of these, so buckle in, folks. Disenfranchised youth who don't believe in the system or respect their elders because their elders don't seem to deserve it. That's one of the themes that makes this movie maybe more poignant being a period piece in '88 than in 2001, although there was still plenty of the kind of counterculture and anti-establishment stuff from the mid-90s still going on, at that time. I think most young adults were still probably feeling that way and subscribing to a lot of that. And there was a huge resurgence of it right after 9/11, of course. Then you have parental/teacher apathy in raising children, public education losing sight of the individual, just bad parenting, bad education in general, oversimplification of human condition and emotion, going back to that love versus fear board, and also the seminar. We teach our children conformity while stifling creativity and discouraging the challenge of authority, which is what Drew Barrymore's character is all about, going against that whole thing. She's talked about as the only good teacher in the school because she wants kids to use their own brains and challenge them. We penalize kids for using their own brains and developing their own sense of right and wrong. This is really poignant stuff that, like I said, most resonates with me in the movie. Particularly the common sense speech that Donnie gives to Cunningham. There is the line between hero and villain. This is the place where it's kind of broaching some superhero ideas, but asking, like, will Donnie become the villain or the hero? He has maybe a chance to go in either direction if we think that he has free will, because that's a big question in this movie. You can't just lump things into categories, like we were just talking about the fear and love thing. Donnie could go either way. We all experience both. We're all good and bad. And again, fear is not the opposite of love. They also don't equal wrong and right. The movie, I think, is going up against the idea that you should get your values entirely and arbitrarily from religion. I don't think it's straight up anti-religion or anti any particular religion, especially because it casts its protagonist as an agnostic and not an atheist, and because there is a question of whether there is a God, which is never answered in the movie. But just blindly following a faith for no reason but you have faith or a book tells you to is played in the film as irresponsible and dangerous. And I think that's best encapsulated in the line where the science teacher says darkness is a necessary part of development, when Donnie and Gretchen weirdly pitch a kind of product in the classroom, the IMG, the infant memory generator, where they suggest you can make children more positive from birth and better at memory if you take away darkness and put things in front of their eyes constantly. And the teacher says, but what if they have to have that? What if that's part of their development? And that is clearly talking about the larger ideas of the movie. Darkness is a necessary part of development. It suggests that seemingly insignificant moments prove to be crucial and change the direction of history. Teenagers need individual attention and space to discover themselves, going back to education. School is like a prison. We've seen a million movies that cast school that way. Adults can be in denial and see the world in black and white, refusing to let their worldview be challenged, especially by kids. We talked about brainwashing already. Social commentary about self-help frauds, making life's challenges sound easy just so they can get your money, and that goes along with trying to solve everything with drugs, which this movie talks about and also really resonated with me. Sometimes it's hard not to appreciate a movie more because you agree with its message, but I think that the message is not horribly heavy-handed or anything. It just presents it and as a satire and lets you make your own decision, although I also have a hard time not seeing it as just simply putting truth on screen because of things that I have experienced myself. Capitalizing on the parental paranoia around drugs and premarital sex, we talked about that earlier. The cringy, sappy VHS tape is spot on. It's one of my favorite kind of satirical moments of the movie, and I could not help but imagine Red Letter Media covering it on a Black Spine Best of the Worst episode, if you've ever seen that. I also like Donnie's father. His parents are like shockingly progressive and are kind of with their kids on these things. They raise their kids to use their own minds, and I like that they don't always get along, and they compromise, and they challenge each other intellectually, and that's why they stay together. A couple, because I was always taught you're not supposed to do this as a married couple. A couple that argues about intellectual things and can joke about the idea of getting divorced, but are like so strong as a couple they know they're joking. That's a really strong couple, and that happens in this movie. That happens in the director's cut. I don't think that scene's in the theatrical version. Nature of the universe, whether there is a God. We talked about that. Another thing that really speaks to me is the bit where Donnie just throws his hands in the air and says, "I just don't debate it anymore." Like I said, I felt that way myself sometimes. So I wonder if we have another kind of meta storytelling thing here. The idea that the world doesn't make sense and somehow we exist and continue on. It's kind of like the theory I had last week with The Man Who Came from Earth, where I suggested with that movie, and you may not have seen that video, but I'll just explain this briefly. There's this idea in that movie about how television shouldn't do all of your thinking for you, and that you should be questioning things that it puts on the screen. And so that movie might be intentionally impossible to follow, just to make sure you're paying attention, to make the point that you shouldn't just take everything at face value that's being fed to you through television. Is this movie kind of also doing that, saying that reality is bizarre and impossible? You can't explain the nature of the universe or why anything really happens. Like this movie, there are patterns. Sometimes you think you've got it figured out. You'll have moments of insight or epiphany, but ultimately, why are we here cannot be answered. It's designed to make the viewer crazy. And more likely, I think it's intended than the theory I had with The Man Who Came to Earth, which I thought was maybe kind of an outlandish idea that just came to me and I wasn't sure that it was intentional in the film. This seems like it might be. Still a story cheat, though. You have that bit where the therapist says the search for God is absurd, and Donnie says it is if everyone dies alone. So yeah, and then it's also about the ways in which the world is like a contrived story, being written by somebody who just hasn't thought everything out, and it can feel that way even if you had all the knowledge. It would make sense because it's very egotistical of us as a species to think that our brains could possibly fathom the complexities of all of the universe. But it does sometimes feel like somebody is writing our story. It talks about Deus Ex Machina. The English teacher has Drew Barrymore the line talking about that, the miracle of storytelling. And then, of course, as we said already, it's about atheism versus agnosticism. Okay, so very briefly, I'll just point out a few of our characters' motivations and how, at least with some of them, that relates to their place in the grand plan to save the universe. So Donnie, again, agnostic, doesn't believe in God, thinks that there's a destiny that can't be denied. He can see it physically. Once he gets his powers, he becomes somewhat fatalistic. No reason to care about people because we all do whatever we're preordained to do, and then we die. Then he changes his mind about that at the end when he has a chance to change history, to save the people he cares about, which begs the question, was that epiphany part of the plan, and was he always going to save the world no matter what? He is the living receiver. Then Gretchen is part of, I think, the manipulated living. We have the manipulated living and the manipulated dead. I don't fully understand this whole thing yet. I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. But anyway, her ideals kind of help to make sure that Donnie goes where he needs to go at the end. She believes that people do have a choice and that life is worth living just to live it. And then Donnie kind of comes around to that because he wants so badly for her to get to continue. His parents might also be part of the manipulated living. crowd, I'm not sure, because the whole, like, so there's a purpose to the people in the tangent universe that died, and a purpose for the ones that live. And the problem is, I don't fully understand what it means, the ones that have died. The ones that died, I guess, within this timeline, like the month that all of this happens. So I guess in that case, really the only manipulated dead that we get is Frank, is the bunny rabbit, if I'm understanding that. Like, I want to think that Kitty Farmer is representing the manipulated dead, but I don't know, because she doesn't die. So I guess probably not. So that kind of breaks down with this whole thing. But I'll still mention worldviews. So the parents see through the brainwashing and hypocrisy of the system, raise their kids to think for themselves, and ultimately that has a lot to do with why Donnie has the perspective he has, and maybe even why he was chosen. There is, of course, the question as to why this keeps happening. If I'm right about Sparrow and that she's been through this, in this town more than once, given that we're told that it's an extremely rare occurrence, but has happened within a woman's 101-year lifespan, and both in this one little town of Middlesex. That's the name of the town. I'm not just coming up with an excuse to say the word sex. It's the name of the town. You also have to wonder how, just going through that, if that's the reason she understands everything about time travel. I'm not sure how she came to everything she came to. I don't think the movie knows that either. I think it's part of the conceit, but I'm just saying, I'm wondering about it. Anne Cunningham, of course, is a parasite who preys on the conservative system of moral decency. We've kind of talked about all that already. Okay. Let me look at some comments here real quick, and then I'll get to a few good things and maybe not as good things, or things I'm not sure about. A lot of people talking about the philosophies and ideas of this movie in the comments here. AMC Comics, hey Cap and Chat, never saw this, so regrettably I don't have much to contribute. Still wanted to pop in. Thanks for being here, appreciate it. Go watch this movie, it's interesting. Watch the director's cut if you get your hands on it. Rainbow Nightmare, another thing about school being prison, needing to do community service to graduate. That's what convicts do. Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Guidi, atheism and agnosticism aren't mutually exclusive. I'm an agnostic atheist. Is that true? Can you be both? Okay. The movie does talk about it as if it were mutually exclusive. So even if that's a thing that I'm just straight up wrong about, the movie is too. I'd be interested to know, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit, how both things are possible. Because as I understood, not that I've done a lot of research into this, but as I understood the terms, atheism is I don't believe in God, and agnosticism is I don't readily right away believe in God, but I'm not eliminating the possibility. So atheism, I know there's not a God. Agnosticism, I don't know. So those would seem to be contradictory things. So maybe I don't understand what atheism is as you're presenting it. I don't know. Philip, Donnie creates Frank to save himself, but Frank is the reason the engine was going to kill Donnie in the first place. Okay, yeah, I'm just not seeing this movie the way you are, I don't think, and that doesn't make you wrong. But the idea of that Donnie creates Frank, I'm having a hard time getting my mind around. I guess the question is, was there a Frank in the original universe before the tangent universe? Because I thought the idea was that Frank was somehow time traveling. And I guess what you're suggesting is in the tangent universe, Frank is created by Donnie, and he's part of this world but didn't exist in it before. Is that what you're saying? And then, but Frank is the reason the engine was going to kill Donnie in the first place. I don't think that tracks with everything we read in the book with the multiple universes. I'm not if it does, I'm not fully understanding how that fits in, and I'm wondering if your read is a read just with the theatrical version. But if that fits with the director's version, I don't fully understand. And like I said, I don't want to spend the whole time just arguing with you back and forth, but I'm wondering about it because I'd hate to miss something. Anyway, you clearly have thought about this longer than I have had a chance to. Guidi, agnosticism is about knowledge and atheism is about beliefs, different things. Okay, I had never heard it laid out that way. So you're saying that you can not know and not believe. I guess I'm not sure how they go together, but my brain's about fried trying to figure this movie out all day long. I've been dealing with this since like 2 PM today, nonstop. Okay, yeah, Philip just has a completely different read on what's happening with the mythology here than what I'm laying out. I'm going to keep running with my notes for the moment. Anyway, so here's stuff that I really appreciated about this movie. Obviously, moodiness, atmosphere. From the beginning, everything feels slightly off, like nothing is quite real, which is the point. It's really got that Matrix thing. It is a newly created secondary reality. It is real, but not real. It's off. Performances, particularly Gyllenhaal and Barrymore. I like the ominous minimal orchestral score when we don't get popular music. I also really appreciate the choices in popular music. I'm going to jump down to the end of my notes and read you something about popular music because I thought this was really impressive. So the opening song is called The Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunnymen. Get it? Bunnymen. I don't know if that was intentional, but I think it's crazy that from the first frame we already have something. Pardon me, about bunnies. It's not just about Frank the Big Bunny Man. You also have Watership Down and a whole metaphor for what's going on with the human race, and again the question of whether or not we're that much more evolved in the grand scheme than bunnies. So here are some lyrics from that song. I think this is in the bridge. We could live for 1,000 years, but if I hurt you, I'd make wine from your tears. I told you that we could fly, because we all have wings, but some of us don't know why. So, there's maybe a read here in these lyrics with what's going on with the movie. The idea that we live for 1,000 years, we keep going on, but I couldn't deal with hurting you. That's kind of foreshadowing the end of the movie, where Donnie is inadvertently going to get Gretchen hurt, or probably feel responsible for it at the very least. And he's got some kind of omnipotence right now, kind of. I was standing, you were there, 2 worlds collided, and they could never tear us apart. It's just crazy how much this song sounds like it's describing this movie. Fate up against your will, through the thick and thin, he will wait until you give yourself to him. That's just the end of the movie. It really feels almost like the whole movie was based on that song. I'm not going to break it down any more than that, but I was kind of impressed with that choice. And there are other songs that kind of do the same thing through the movie. I like that we have a troubled teen that has a relatively stable and happy home life. It makes it not horribly cliche and stereotyped, and it gives us some likable characters to latch onto. I like seeing some decent parenting in the middle of all the horrible education and really bad parenting. That teacher, the gym teacher, is awful and horrific, and it really bothers me that she's teaching or raising children. I like that the movie can be as dreary and bleak looking as it is without having any sense of humor. Without losing its sense of humor, excuse me, and by, again, having some characters that are likable and still feel real within the dreary atmosphere of this movie. I'd like to see more horror films tackled the way this is, even if you don't want to call this a straight-up horror movie. But it's got elements, of course. Probably more than superhero, honestly. There's some natural exposition and dialogue that I was kind of impressed with. You've got the bit where, toward the beginning, where Donnie tells his sister, maybe you should be the one in therapy, that tells the audience that he's in therapy without feeling too, in your face or stilted about it. There are intriguing mysteries from the beginning. It's a good psychological thriller. Why is a protagonist not taking his medicine? Is he out doing crazy, horrible things to people? Like, how much can we trust him? Gyllenhaal, going all the way back, is really good in roles like this. Bits of this remind me of Nightcrawler a little bit. It's like that movie if he turned out to be a good person by the end. Is he sleepwalking, or is it something worse? It takes us all movie to realize that our disturbed main character, who we are suspicious of, is actually the hero of the story, although an hour in, at least time-wise with the director's cut, I am already with him and rooting for him no matter what happens because of the common sense speech that he gives to Patrick Swayze. I like the ticking time bomb and sense of urgency of the end of the world. On first viewing, with the theatrical cut, I found myself wondering if end of the world was a relative thing. If it was not the end of the actual literal world, but just his world, the people he cares about. And then once you get to, and that was a read that I was kind of hanging on to and I thought made sense. And then when you look at the director's cut, it can't be that because of all of the concrete, but of course arbitrarily decided upon rules of time travel. I like the cinematography in this movie a lot. One of my favorite bits is toward the beginning, the anticipation of what Donnie is seeing when he walks up to his house, and the camera turns and we finally see the airplane turbine. That's great. Pardon me, I've been talking a long time. Frake's spooky voice, and of course the memorable haunting bunny suit. I found an action figure for that online. I didn't buy it, but I didn't realize that was made. That's pretty cool. A lot of good world building. We'll introduce things before we understand what they're there for, giving some credibility to the world. So the first time you see the attitudinal beliefs book that Cunningham writes is being carried by the evil gym teacher. And I really like that montage at the beginning, in slow motion, establishing characters and ideas without talking about anything, and then building upon them later. Like I said, use of popular music, lyrics from Tears for Fears' Time Flies, while footage is sped up in the classroom. That's pretty good. Sometimes it annoys me when popular songs are just telling us what's happening in the movie. Here it felt more sophisticated than that. I don't know. Anchored subtly into the time period. It's 1988, so when the science teacher explains to Donnie how time travel would theoretically work, he asks if you could use a DeLorean. That's pretty good. Excellent foreshadowing all over the movie. It knows where it's going, even if I don't think it all adds up. The woman talking to Donnie's mom about Cunningham says, "I can't believe he's single." And later we find out why that is, because he's running a kiddie porn ring. Unfortunately, names, we have a lot of names that reflect theme and character. Darko. Immediately you're thinking, okay, he's going to be bad. And then, of course, it subverts that, but he's still mysterious and kind of emo-ish. Again, there's a real aloof thing that Gyllenhaal does very well. So Dark-O, he's dark-ish. Cunningham, cunning and hammy. He pulls the wool over everyone's eyes, and he's beyond cheesy. And then I guess the town is called Middlesex because our protagonist is a teenager who thinks about sex a lot. Maybe. I don't know. There are a lot of subtle and realistic reactions to things. One of my favorite moments, I really like all the subtlety in this movie. There's a scene where the kids are standing at a bus stop. I think this is just a bus stop. I think this is just in the director's cut, where they hear a jet engine and they all look at each other, or they all kind of look up in private terror, but nobody says anything. That's great. Like I said, one of the best bits in the movie is when Donnie dresses Cunningham down at the seminar. There's so much truth in that scene. Both the BS portions and the common sense portions are really authentic, and I believe these characters delivering that dialogue. Learn to truly love yourself, and the world will open up to you. Ugh. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. What's he supposed to do, though, the kid? And then the response from... This is the best bit of acting Gyllenhaal has in the whole movie. The response from Donnie when he says, "You want your sister to lift weights, tell her to get up off the couch and go play field hockey. No one knows what they want to be when they grow up. It takes a little while to figure that out. You're the effing Antichrist." Yeah, see, at that point, I am 100% with this kid no matter what happens after that. I like the symbolism in the transition of the time travel book. On the page, so you've got the body with the arrow pointing to the right, and then we transition to Donnie himself following the path. That's really good. Another good bit of foreshadowing. I didn't think of this until I saw this another time. When they're in the movie theater, Gretchen is asleep, looking kind of dead. Frank shows up to talk to Donnie. He reveals his eye. This is all foreshadowing for the last scene of the movie. Donnie will shoot him in the eye after... Frank runs Gretchen down with a car. Then you have the bit where Drew Barrymore loses her job because she's not conforming to the brainwashing policies of the school, and she just screams the F word into the stratosphere. It's wonderful. It's the reason Barrymore should be in this movie. I'm so glad that her production company made this movie so she could do that, and it's very, very memorable. Guidi, with different cuts, I feel it's important to find the general consensus, then watch it, and if you dig it, maybe consider other cuts with the goal choosing the cut for you. Yeah, and the problem with this is just, it's an unfinished movie if you only watch the theatrical version. I mean, it might be fun not having answers and, like, coming up with your own read on that particular version, but... Like, the guy who made it would say you're wrong. I mean, I believe very much in death of the author, but I also don't think that there's enough in that movie to tell you what you're really looking at. That's how I feel about it. But a lot of people saw it without knowing any of the extra stuff that's in the director's cut, not having that. Once again, Philip laying out a very different version of this than what I thought I was looking at. I mean, you're right. Donnie has to learn to come to terms with dying alone. He dies alone so everyone else can live. Yeah, no, I get that. Frank wants Donnie to die, but Donnie created Frank to save himself. Okay. I mean, I just have to spend more time with this movie, I guess, because a lot of what you're talking about, I did not pick up on at all. But again, there are also lots and lots of different reads with this movie. Okay, stuff that I didn't really appreciate or wasn't sure about. At the very beginning, I think making Donnie sympathetic enough is kind of a hard line to walk. On the one hand, we're supposed to wonder if he's a horror movie villain. But then he isn't, and he's made fairly likable throughout the course of the movie. I would introduce him, besides the kind of smile he has at the beginning, before we see the words on the screen, which I kind of wondered about, because if Frank is not part of his imagination or his own creation somehow, as the way as Philip is suggesting it. I mean, honestly, Philip's read makes more sense than he's just a ghost, I guess. But I don't know. I keep going back to this because I'm trying to figure out if I'm just misreading this entire movie now and wasting everybody's time. Let me go back to this for a second. The way the time travel book reads with the text that we get, it seems like, and this is part of why I didn't come to that, it seems like the idea is another universe is created, and then it chooses kind of a chosen one, or like the one, and then it gives him powers. And he has hallucinations as a way to pay for the powers, but there's nothing in there about his having any like reality manipulation. He apparently has telekinesis and that kind of thing. I forget what all is said that he can do, but I don't know that he can like subconsciously create another physical person in the world out of whole cloth like that. But maybe I didn't get that. Anyway, so yeah, I would have maybe not introduced the protagonist in the scene like just cussing out his mother or having that happen so early, because I'm kind of turning against him on first viewing for a different reason than I may be supposed to, where like I just don't like how mean he is to his mom, and I don't understand why he's doing that. And later I do understand it, but I think since he's supposed to be a more sympathetic character later on, I'm supposed to be suspicious of him, but not like disliking him. I might have introduced him in a different way. That's just a personal thing on my part, right? Like I don't like that he's introduced in that way. Not that scene happens. Just show me something he does before that. Of course, too many coincidences and details that don't add up, that can be explained away, of course, with fate, but some of that feels like a cop-out. And again, it is a movie that's intentionally about Deus Ex Machina, so like, maybe it kind of technically works, but it's frustrating when you've got characters that come alive and feel so real, and you've got real actions and consequences, and then you have things that they just do because they have to make the next thing happen. Like I said, some questionable effects even for 2001, I think, but it's $5.5 million. The two-dimensional bullies are kind of over the top. There might be a point being made there that bad parenting and bad education creates that. It's maybe another way for kids to rebel against a system that oppresses their self-expression, but in the moment, I felt like they were kind of underdrawn, maybe. Every now and again, there's a bit of dialogue writing that feels a little unnatural or stilted, but for the most part, it's pretty good. Sometimes I don't know what the details are saying, what the point of just certain moments are, like when Donnie is being hypnotized and almost masturbates. Like, what does that say about Donnie versus, like, any other teenager that's just, like, sexually repressed or just thinking about sex all the time, just real hormonal. Same thing with, like, the debate about the Smurf anatomy and sex or lack thereof. It seems to just be there to reinforce where Donnie's priorities are, where his mind is. It reads like it's about something larger, but I'm not picking up on what that might be. Again, some of this is just too ambiguous for my taste and kind of driving me nuts, really. It's not clear how much of what happens with Donnie and the rabbit is in his mind or physically happening. Like, is the rabbit actually, like, creating the, like, invisible barrier in the air and that kind of thing? I'm just not sure. A lot of mistakes in cutting things out of the theatrical version, like I said before, like philosophy of time travel. If that's your mythology, you've got to find a way to get it in there, but they couldn't get the movie released that way, so I guess I get that. Occasionally, we'll get a little too on the nose with metaphors and, like, connections to pop culture. Last Temptation of Christ on the theater marquee, maybe a little on the nose when, like, everything means something. We did that right after, and this isn't a thing I understood until the director's cut. They go to see Evil Dead in a thing where in the time travel book we're told that we have the dead people that are, like, trying to help him, or not I guess it's the dead living, what is it called? I can't remember anymore. Anyway, they're seeing the Evil Dead because of the whole kind of Walking Dead, the manipulated dead, the whole Walking Dead idea. That's why they go see that. So, like, okay, I get why you have that. And then you have Temptation of Christ on top of it, right after that. Okay, that's a little on the nose. Cellar door is really contrived. That's just there so that Donnie will think to check Sparrow's cellar door. But again, you have maybe a cosmic entity manipulating things. So I don't know. Okay, so I have already answered tons of questions, or pardon me, I haven't answered very many questions at all. I've already asked some questions. I'm going to flip through this and see what things I've missed. Because we're already at past an hour and a half here. And I have been over this pretty thoroughly. There's a really weird change that I don't understand in the director's cut. So when they go to the talent show, there's the Charita Chen character, and she has a performance in the talent show. She's this outcast, overweight girl that nobody seems to like very much, and she's bullied all the time. She is on stage and does her performance, and in the theatrical version, the bully kids boo her and are really mean to her, and she has a sad reaction to it, and her mother has a sad reaction to it. And then later, you see her outside sitting by herself lamenting it. All of the reactions are left in the director's cut, but the sound of the booing is gone. So none of those responses make a whole lot of sense. Like, she seemed to have a good performance, and yet she's still by herself and sad, and her mother reacts as if it didn't go very well. I don't know if they just missed it, if they forgot to add it back in or something, but that was very strange. The name Frank is in a lot of places, and if Philip is right in his read, that might be the reason where this new reality is reflecting, at least if somehow he's creating more things than just Frank in this other reality. I don't know. I don't get this movie entirely, and I don't think it's possible to. Philip seems to think he's got 100% read on it. I submit I don't think you possibly could, but that's just me. So, like, the kid in Cunningham's story is named Frank, except to get a rise out of the audience and freak out Donnie. I don't know why that's his name. Beyond any other, reality shaping shenanigans that I'm not getting. What does Donnie mean in that same scene when he tells Gretchen we're moving through time? Like, we see time speed up. I don't know why it does that. Like, is he experiencing time faster? Or is he just having the epiphany that he can go backwards and that technically we're all moving through time? I don't really know why he says that. Why can't Donnie just go talk to Roberta Sparrow? In the first place, he's not in a hurry to go do that, and I don't really know why, unless he's just trying to finish the time travel book first, but we're not told that. We don't see him constantly reading it. I don't know when he finished it. And then, when he goes to find her, like, this is one of those examples of characters doing things just because the story has to work out the way it does. She knows there's a letter from him coming, so she has to check her mailbox at some point and get the letter. And none of that really seemed to have that much bearing on the end of the story anyway, so I don't know why it has to happen, except that it does with the fate thing. I guess that's all it is. So he goes to her house, can't find her, realizes that she's not in the house but outside, and then says, I'll just mail her the letter. I don't know why he doesn't try doing both. It's weird. Like I said earlier, how does Sparrow figure out how time travel works? What does it matter if Donnie's mom is on the plane if the whole universe is at stake? I mean, I guess maybe just that if Donnie knows that, I guess he knows she's on the plane. I guess it's the same thing, and I sort of alluded to this earlier. I guess it's the same thing as, his girlfriend gets hurt, but at the end of the day, like, everybody was going to die if he didn't save the universe, so he needs to viscerally see her get killed. He doesn't see that with his mother, so I don't know what the point is of her being on that airplane, unless the idea was it's not about the destruction of the universe, it's just about the destruction of his emotional world. but I don't think it can be that. I think it really is literally the end of the universe. A lot of the rest of this doesn't make sense if it isn't that. Why does Donnie say he has the power to build a time machine? We don't see him build one. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure what's happening at the end. All we see is the vortex, and then he's back in time, or at least he is in the bedroom in the regular Prime universe. So I've seen different reads and different people arguing about this, that like he didn't time travel, he or like it's not him there, it's the other version of him, but then why is he laughing? Like, I don't really understand that read. If you need a vessel to go back, I don't totally know what he did unless he's somehow like riding on the turbine, but he's not. Maybe it's it's another version of him in bed laughing for some reason, and then he like rode the turbine there, but I don't think that happened. So yeah, I don't fully understand what's happening at the end. The sacrifice is clear. That's all that really matters. Philip Kelton, he does that. That's why he flooded the school. I'm not sure what we're talking about. Slasher Fred, Donnie Darko is almost like a horror version of the 1950s comedy classic Harvey, where the main character has a man-like rabbit for a friend. That's true. Good call. Yeah, I didn't have that thought. That's a good point. Why is Seth Rogen trying to kill Donnie at the end? Like, why now? I get that he's been antagonistic and everything, but like it feels pretty contrived that happens where it happens. Again, the answer to all of this stuff is, well, this is what has to happen. But I just, in a thing like this, I kind of need like free will and destiny to kind of line up in some way, because people aren't just acting like lemmings, except for when they are, and it's frustrating. Like, Gretchen does not seem hurt enough that she can't roll out of the way when the car is about to hit her. Maybe she is. It's not real clear how hurt she is. But it just seems like maybe she could roll out of the way. I don't know. Okay, I think that's going to be it for my analysis, and I'm sorry this was as haphazard as it was by the end, but like I said, Philip's got this whole other read on this thing, and now I'm really questioning a lot of what I thought was happening with this, but I also think it's ambiguous enough that it's easy for different people to see different things looking at it, and I think it's too easy, and I think that's kind of the problem with it, but I latched onto a lot of character stuff and ideas, and I like the overall like mood, and it's an enjoyable movie to watch. So, yeah, I'll do my rating here in a minute. First, let's take a look at tweet-length reviews, starting with Super Billy. Despite all the time travel and metaphysics, the film is primarily a tragic but ultimately uplifting coming-of-age story. It's an emotionally and intellectually captivating experience that remains one of my all-time favorites. Trippy, unique, thought-provoking, haunting, and poignant. 4 out of 4. Subject, 879, one of my favorite psychological thrillers, great performances, and a great score. 3 out of 4. TH1, is Donnie Darko a good movie? No. I think it's a good movie. I'm frustrated with it, but I think it's a good movie. No, but what it lacks in story, it greatly makes up for in cinematography. I wouldn't consider this a superhero film, considering the only heroic thing he does gets undone in the final act. 2 out of 4. If you understand the dimensional thing, or the multi-reality thing that's going on, it's not undone really, but it's very confusing. Connor Nielsen, it has been many years since I've seen Donnie Darko, but its confidence and ominous tone left an impression on me as an 18-year-old that remains to this day. That's exactly the right age to see this for the first time. The use of head over heels by Tears for Fears is one of my personal favorite needle drops in all of film. 3 out of 4. I agree, it's wonderful. And I appreciate you guys, by the way. Nice that we've got a few of these this time. Miguel R. Pardon me. These are, by the way, from Patreon, and some of them Superhero Rewind producers. Great visuals and acting with a very messy plot. The whole thing is dated in a really endearing way to me, too, if that makes any sense. 3 out of 4. Yes, it absolutely does. I think at the end of the day, and on multiple watches, I might find myself having a totally different interpretation and kind of epiphanies looking at this. I don't know. At the moment, especially because this is about story analysis as much as anything, I'm going to go with a 2.5 out of 4, just like last week's Man Who Fell to Earth, because I like them for different reasons at the end of the day. And there it was all about the ideas. Here it's character stuff and also some ideas, but it is a really, like you said, Miguel, messy, convoluted story that I don't think is possible to fully put together. But that's just my feeling on it. Let's go ahead and rank this movie. I did it on Superhero Rewind, even if I can't decide for sure if it should be considered a superhero movie. And I've got it in the 2.5 area here, so I have to put it in this section. And I'm finding myself putting this higher and higher, rising this up. There's Dark Knight Rises. There's Man of Steel. There's Thor. Like, I don't know, like, character-wise, I think it resonates with me more than some of those movies. This is tough, because these are some big movies that I found problematic, but not enough to put below 2.5 for various reasons. They're still that high. Like, man, where am I going to put this? I just keep kind of rising it higher and higher, or raising it, pardon me, higher and higher. I think I'm going to put it, man, there's some heavy hitters here too. Like, does it go above Thor? Does it go above Ant-Man? Like, I think I like it more than Thor. I don't know if it's a better movie overall. They're different things. It's weird to compare them, certainly. Wow, am I going to put it this high? But am I going to put it under Ant-Man? Like, it's more interesting than that movie, certainly. And some of this ends up just being kind of a taste thing. I think for right now, I'm going to put it at 71. And some people that really hate Forever will think I'm crazy with that. But yeah, for right now, that's where I'm going to put it. This is such an arbitrary exercise. But I reserve the right to change that at any time. Anyway. All right, well, folks, this was a very complicated and crazy movie to try to review in this format, but I appreciate you guys for sticking with me. Thanks, as always, to our patrons and everybody that has ever been a patron or currently is. But I want to thank individually, of course, our Patreon producers. And, of course, once again, if you want to become a producer, that's just the $10 tier on Patreon. It gets you access to the Superhero Rewind Discord. You can chat with me and the other producers. We've got a good, healthy group of them there, and we talk about superhero movies, and we talk about upcoming rewinds, and those guys give me information that I might not have had before, which is really helpful. Like, they're very involved in the process now, which is really cool. But one of the perks that you get, of course, is you get your name read at the end of every Superhero Rewind. And I'm going to do that right now. Thanks so much to Zach, Wendell Jones, Thorne Jones, no relation, Miguel Rodriguez, Michael Gulick, Kareem Roberts, Jacob Schneider, Damon Bugay, Checkers, the Inventor, Adam March, Thomas Edgeshill, The Day Ghost, Super Billy, Stone, Gassman, SS Jerry, Michael Martin, Josh Guasano, Jojira, Joe Turner, Hot Soup, Goofster123, Elliot Slater, David Crabtree, and Chewbacca's Lover, and finally, Blake. Once again, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you. AMC, You're Not Crazy, Cap Forever is awesome. Okay, so, next time, I alluded to this earlier, I'm going to review another movie that's going to be nuts to put in sequence with these last two that were very brain-bendy and made me do lots of thinking. This one will make me do a different sort of thinking. It's not a superhero movie. I've got to do one more request for this month, and I'm out of superhero movies on rewind requests. I'm going to open up the request here again after I've got a few more of these knocked out. I'm making some headway now. I've got several rewind requests from the old $40 tier, and I don't know what dollar amount I'm going to open that back up at again, but I will certainly do that again after, like I said, I've done a few more of these. But next time, I'm finally going to finish out the Star Wars prequels and do Revenge of the Sith. We did Attack of the Clones, 3 months ago, 2-3 months ago, and I'm finally going to finish those out. So I have done the first two, all requested by Bag Studios. And thanks again to Bag. He's got a few movies still left on the list. I think 3 after that, maybe 3 or 4. And yeah, so that's what we're doing next time. So look forward to it. Strap in. It should be fun for a very different reason than these were. Anyway, I'll see you again real soon, folks. Thanks so much for being here. Superhero Rewind tomorrow night at the original time, 7 o'clock instead of 8 Central Time. We'll talk to you for at least an hour, probably quite a bit longer. And you guys are wonderful. Really appreciate you. Thanks for watching live. Thanks for watching after the fact. I'm Captain Logan. I'll see you next time.